Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's time for us to begin the end of the class with modernism. So you'll see that we're moving into the early 20th century. And interesting little side note is that unlike the before with Romanticism and Realism that had kind of the uncertain, soft beginning and endings, 1914, 1939, these are really fixed dates. As we take a look here, we see 1914 is, of course, the start of World War I, and then 1939, start of World War II. So these are pretty well set as we continue moving through. So how did we get here to modernism? If we reflect upon where we left, which was realism, and before that was Romanticism, right? The belief that life was better in the country than in the city. And we have the growth of cities. We saw that urbanism, right, wins that. And urbanism is continuing, not just in England during this time, but throughout Europe as well as America. This growth of cities is really incredible during this time. Then those two figures, bottom left and right, Karl Marx, Charles Darwin, right? They're some of the influential thinkers with realism, and their contributions help us to get modernism with Karl Marx and his works of Das Kapital as well as the Communist Manifesto, published in London during the Victorian Age, didn't come into fruition. In other words, his ideas, his theories weren't enacted upon until the Russian Revolution, when Lenin helped to overthrow the Tsar during World War I and install the communist state Soviet Union. Then we have Charles Darwin, right, with his theory, survival of the fittest, that life can be explained without reference to divine laws or purpose. And as well, the work of Charles Darwin really contributed in a strong way to the sense of doubt that becomes quite common throughout Victorian literature, like we saw with Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, that sense of faith is retreating and leaving us. So now, as we move into modernism, take a look at its influential thinkers. We see they are, from left to right, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, and then Albert Einstein. Many people are familiar with Freud's works, the very influential psychiatrist. He stressed the importance of things in our minds that we are not necessarily aware of, such as dreams and the subconscious. He said that those things that we're really not aware of indeed have great impact on our day-to-day choices, whether we're aware of them or not. As well, another thing that people don't recognize or unwilling to recognize, it's the driving force of sex in our lives. So what happens with Freud's works is that the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, becomes displaced by the Trinity of modernity, which is the id, the ego, and the superego. So that's what we get from Freud, and the result of Freud's contributions in psychiatry and psychology, the social morality really suddenly becomes very, very relaxed in modernism. A good way to think about this would be in the 1920s, the idea, the flappers, right? Everybody's familiar with those during Prohibition, and how the women really started to behave differently because of the works of Sigmund Freud. We have a much more open society and very informal behavior in society. We get all of this from Freud and his theories. Now, next in the middle, that is Friedrich Nietzsche. his idea of the Übermensch, or the superhuman. Not a superhero, as I almost said, but the superhuman. So what the Übermensch is, this is an individual who refuses to be bound by society's existing forms. Now, this is kind of neat. This idea of the superhuman has its roots. Does that sound familiar? Hopefully, maybe, in the Byronic hero. Now, Lord Byron, right, when he came up with the Byronic hero, he didn't know that this was going to happen, right? But with the superhuman, the Übermensch, it says, I'm not going to be bound by religion. I'm not going to be bound by government. I'm not going to be bound by science. I'm sure not going to be bound by economic forces. All right, so this is when we see viewing the world as, just there's no sense of confinement here for the Übermensch. As well, Nietzsche viewed and believed that the bulk of society is unimaginative and mediocre, just blah. And if you've ever looked out and watched the news and you just read the paper and you just think, wow, Nietzsche's right. The bulk of society, it's just a whole bunch of blah. Also, another thing that came about from the work of Nietzsche, and this is the most common thing, is that God is dead. Then, to the far right, we get Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was doing some incredible work with, atoms. We're all familiar with atoms. Einstein, was working there with the subatomic particles and found out that atoms, which are incredibly small, are made up of particles that are even just so much smaller that the world is incredibly small, and it's also expanding at the same time, and it's really hard to explain all this stuff. And the bulk of most people can't understand his theory of relativity, but one of the amazing things that Einstein proved is that time and space are dependent upon or relative to observation. So what happens is that there's really no solid truths anymore, and science displaces man and how we understand the world and our place in the world. And so we take the work of these three influential thinkers, Freud, Nietzsche, and Einstein, add to it World War I, and then bang, then we have modernism. It's just like lighting a firecracker, and then all of a sudden, bang, there it is. All of the old-fashioned ideas of being a hero and, chivalry, opening up the door for someone, saying, helping someone across the street, gone almost all at once. With World War I, we have great technological advancements that are not serving mankind. In other words, that are not doing good things for humanity, but we're killing humanity. Yeah, I know. So we have more than 10 million casualties worldwide. It's the great civilization. We're destroying ourselves. There's incredible social change because of World War I, for example. Women join the workforce because all the men are off in the trenches getting blown up. So women have to, make bullets and make machine guns, tires, tank treads. In Europe, the countries of Europe lose their overseas colonies. And as well, this is for one of the first times ever the individual realized that he or she was really powerless regarding the choices that he or she made in his or her life. Because it didn't matter, because, wow, 10 million people. Interesting little fact, World War I is the first war in which civilians were targeted. Today we really don't think about killing innocent civilians in war, it's just like, well, yeah, they're the bad guys. But in every other war leading up to World War One, you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't shell a town or a village. You would just, try to target the soldiers. So what happens is that we have a new century being born, and a dark cloud looms over this new century. And just in case you're curious, the 20th century is the most violent century that we know of. More people died from own hands than any other century that we know of. So we're about to pick up and continue with modernism.